Hello, everyone. As I told you before, I had put together a presentation about abuse, and so I'm going to talk about it and do it in different parts. So, we're going to do like a series of abuse. In this series, we're going to talk about the definitions of verbal, emotional, and physical abuse, the cycle of abuse and the common signs, and how abuse impacts mental and emotional well-being. Let's first get into what is abuse. So there are different types of abuse. There's emotional, verbal, physical, sexual, spiritual, financial, psychological, neglect, self-neglect, modern slavery, acts of omission, and many more. Again, we're only going to focus on emotional, verbal, and physical abuse in this particular series starting off, but we can go deeper if you would like for me to go deeper and continue to make more videos. So let's get into what is abuse. Abuse, the overall textbook definition, is a physical, sexual, emotional, economic, or psychological actions or threats of action that influence another person. It's when you misuse something or someone in a cruel or violent treatment, and usually abuse occurs when you're dealing with a person or an animal. Again, in this video, we are only going to talk about verbal abuse. I'm just going to break down what a verbal abuse is, and then stay tuned to the next video because then we'll go into the next one and go from there. Verbal abuse is the use of words to control, criticize, or manipulate another person. Examples of verbal abuse is insults, name calling, demeaning language, constant criticism and put downs, yelling, shouting, or using harsh tone, threats, and intimidation through words. Again, an examples of verbal abuse is when someone is calling you any name other than your name, and they're doing this all the time. They're constantly criticizing you. They're constantly putting you down. They're constantly got judgment. They're always yelling. They're always shouting. They're using a tone that doesn't make you feel good, right? A tone that is demeaning, a tone that is hurtful, harsh, scary, and they are always threatening or intimidating you, whether they are using their body to intimidate, their height, their age. A great example of intimidation through words. I don't know if anybody's seen the movie Matilda, but remember when the dad was like, I'm big, you're little, I'm smart. To me, that's an example of intimidation through words, right? They're looking someone in the face and they're looking down on them and they're saying, listen, I'm bigger than you. I'm better than you. I'll beat you up, right? They're throwing the threats. I'll slap you in your mouth. What you going to do about it? So these are examples of verbal abuse, calling you any name but your name. Even if it's something simple like calling someone, oh, you're sensitive or you're a crybaby. One may say, well, listen, those are not harsh words. But if someone is constantly calling you out of your name or, oh, you're fat, like that's verbal abuse. Why do you have to keep addressing someone's issue over and over again? This is putting someone down because you're not saying it as a compliment. So if someone is constantly doing this is examples of verbal abuse. Now let's get into the impact of verbal abuse and what it has on a person who has experienced verbal abuse. It can mess with your self-esteem and self-worth. It creates a hostile and fearful environment, and it can lead to emotional and psychological trauma. If someone is constantly being put down, constantly being called out their name, that's going to affect their self-esteem. Have you ever heard the saying, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me? That saying is so not true because words do hurt. Even the Bible says life and death lies in the power of the tongue. So if someone is speaking harsh things to you, they're speaking death, right? And that does have an effect. Many years ago, there was a scientist that did a project with their students, and they basically got different plants, and they went to one plant and they spoke life. They was like, you're beautiful, you're kind, you're amazing, you were created to be great. And then they had another plant where they just said mean things to the plant. They was like, you an ugly plant. You a stupid plant. You ain't gonna be nothing plant. And in their project, what they learned over time was the plant that they spoke horrible to started to die, started to wither up. And then the plant that they spoke life to blossomed. It grew. It was beautiful. And if plants can die off your words, what can a person do? So we have to be very careful with what we say to people. But verbal abusers, they know exactly what they're doing. And that's why they are verbal abusers. That's why we're talking about this, because people who verbally abuse, they are not trying to uplift you or edify you or make you feel great about yourself. Their goal is to harm you in some type of way, to mess with your psyche, to create fear, to create a hostile environment, to make you not feel worthy, to lower your self-esteem. Words matter. How we use our words matter. And how a person talks to you matters. And just because a person does not yell at you, that doesn't mean they're not verbally abusive. There are some people who feel that because they didn't raise their voice and they didn't yell, they're not verbally abusive. And that is a lie. If you're using demeaning language and threats and intimidation and criticism, and you're constantly doing this, you are a verbal abuser. This is an example of verbal abuse. Well, that's all I have for this particular video. Stay tuned for the next part, because in the next part, we're going to talk about emotional abuse. See you next time. Bye.